Human ingenuity, when pressed to its limits, is absolutely amazing. Consider going to the moon or building the Hoover Dam. Whenever people are given a problem to solve, their solutions are nothing short of fascinating. Unfortunately, this same ingenuity is also utilized in crime. Turns out that when a big enough payout is at stake, humans will come up with just as creative solutions to get a pot of gold as to the moon. Here are the 5 most impressive heists of all time. Number 5. Charles Ponzi. You've heard the term Ponzi scheme thrown around on the news, but do you know where it comes from? To kick off our list, we have the namesake of the Ponzi scheme, Charles Ponzi. Ponzi's original intent seems legit. We don't really have these anymore, but in Ponzi's day in the 1920s, postage reply coupons were commonplace. This was a coupon sent with a letter that prepaid replied postage costs. What Ponzi noticed was that the rates of the coupons varied widely in different parts of the world, so his plan was to purchase a bunch of cheap ones, ship them to where they were more expensive, and resell them for a nice sized profit. Makes total sense, so investors began lining up for this chance at an amazing return with basically no risk. He offered 50% return in 45 days or 100% return in 90 days, which is an unheard of profit and should have been a red flag for these investors. But where Ponzi's plan fell apart was that crossing the Atlantic Ocean to Europe was a long and expensive journey. Not to mention the time and manpower it would take just to lug around the millions of postal coupons he was supposedly dealing. So instead of actually making the trek, Ponzi began paying investors with money from new investors, the good old-fashioned pyramid project. And this worked just fine for a while, but the huge piles of cash Ponzi was moving turned eyeballs and caused people to start scrutinizing his operation. And the holes they started to poke in his scheme were devastating. A journalist pointed out that in order for all of this to be true, there would have to be 160 million postal reply coupons in circulation. But in reality, there were only 27,000. Further, the postal record showed no sizable purchases of coupons had taken place in recent history. Investor panic ensued and Ponzi paid out $2 million, equivalent to $25 million today, to crowds of investors gathering outside his office. The eventual collapse brought down 6 banks and resulted in $193 million in losses to investors in today's dollars. Charles Ponzi received 5 years in federal prison, a pretty light sentence if you ask me. Number 4. Antwerp Diamonds. In what is commonly called the heist of the century, a 5-man team of bandits led by Leonardo Notar Bartolo lifted $100 million worth of diamonds, gold, and other jewelry from the famous Diamonds District in Antwerp, Belgium. The ringleader had assembled a group of experts in lockpicking, alarm systems, key forging, and other traits that made the theft of the impossibly secure facility possible. Notar Bartolo and company were eventually tracked down after being connected to the crime by DNA evidence from a partially eaten salami sandwich left near the scene. The leader was sentenced to 10 years, and an interview with Wired magazine claimed that he had been hired by a diamond merchant in an attempt to commit insurance fraud. Number 3. Dunbar. We tend to think that bank robbers are a thing of the past, only seen in the Wild West, old-timey gangster films, or Batman. But think again, bank robberies are still alive and well, and much more common than you might assume. According to the FBI, there are 5,000 reported bank robberies in America every year. However, due to sophisticated security measures and technologically advanced law enforcement, virtually every one of these robberies results in arrest and federal prison for the bad guys. Dunbar Armored is a company that provides worldwide detective, security, armored car, and cash safes, as well as other logistical and security services. A company that specializes in all things security is the last one you would expect to get robbed. But they were the victims of the biggest bank heist ever recorded in the United States. Perhaps it was because the company was so focused on keeping the bad guys out that they lost sight of the threat from within. Alan Pace was a regional inspector for Dunbar, and his position within the company allowed him to mastermind the operation by taking photographs of facilities timing security cameras, and cataloging the ebb and flow of cash and security guards within the tightly secure buildings. Pace chose a Friday night in 1997 since he knew the vault would be unlocked and plenty of cash would be flowing in. He and 5 of his childhood friends entered the Dunbar armored facility using Pace's keys and carefully made their way to the cafeteria, avoiding the security cameras, which Pace had meticulously timed to escape being filmed. Once they made it to the cafeteria, they hid out and picked off security guards one by one as they took their lunch breaks, before rushing the vault guards so quickly that they didn't have time to trigger the alarm. Over the next 30 minutes, the group loaded $18.9 million into a waiting U-Haul truck. The last item they retrieved before leaving the facility were all the security camera recording devices which Pace had located in the weeks leading up to the robbery. The gang then began the task of laundering their newfound money through real estate properties and fake businesses to make off with their millions. Alan Pace had so carefully planned this operation and covered his tracks that when police began examining Dunbar employees, they found nothing suspicious about it. The heist was almost complete when one of the conspirators, Eugene Lamar Hill, made a fatal mistake and paid a real estate broker in cash with original currency straps. The broker immediately went to the police. Hill was arrested, confessed, and gave up the rest of his bank robbing buddies. Alan Pace was sentenced to 24 years in prison, but shockingly, only $5 million of the original money was recovered. The other $13.9 million was successfully laundered and has yet to be found. Number 2. Brazil Tunnel. In 2005, the equivalent of around $70 million was stolen from a Banco Central bank in Fortaleza, Brazil. A conspiracy thought to involve at least 25 people avoided detection by security cameras and removed 3.5 tons of bills from the bank. The currency they lifted just happened to be marked for incineration, meaning that there was no existing record of the serial numbers and the cash was therefore untraceable. But the most impressive detail of this heist was how the entourage gained access to the vault. The group established a fake landscaping business under which they dug a tunnel, conveniently hauling the dirt away with their landscaping vehicles. The 200-foot-long tunnel was constructed complete with ventilation and lifting system and is thought to have cost around $200,000. Afterwards, it all fell apart when one of the burglars bought 10 cars in one day. This arrested conspirator spilled the beans, giving up the ring of criminals involved. But authorities were only able to recover about $8 million of the stolen cash. And number 1, Bernie Madoff. The heir to Charles Ponzi and pulling off pyramid schemes is the notorious Bernie Madoff. Madoff founded a brokerage firm in the 1960s, which grew into one of the top market makers on Wall Street. He lived a high life until his sons, in 2008, went to authorities to give up their father's sham, calling it one big lie. Madoff ran his scheme out of a back office located on a separate floor from his front business. The employees would generate false trade reports, tricking investors into thinking he was some sort of genius, while all along simply depositing all the investor money in an account at Chase Bank. Madoff would just leave all the cash sitting there until investors wanted paid. At this point, he would use their money, plus the cash from other investors, to make the payout. Much like Ponzi's situation, in order for Madoff to have pulled off the feat he was selling to investors, he would have had to buy more options on the Chicago Board Options Exchange than actually existed. But learning a lesson from Ponzi, he urged his investors to keep the whole thing quiet, knowing that if word started to spread, his clients would discover the fraud. In Madoff's eventual confession, he claimed he had been committing this sham since the 1990s. But investigators later found that the heist had been most likely going since the 1970s, pulling the wool over the financial world's eyes for nearly 40 years. After the collapse, the total owed to customers was roughly $57 billion. $17.3 billion of this had been actually invested by customers. $7.6 billion had been recovered, but after pending lawsuits, only $2.6 billion was available to repay victims of the scheme. Madoff pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 150 years in prison. He made a public apology to his victims, stating, "I have left a legacy of shame to my family and my grandchildren." This is something I will live for the rest of my life. I'm sorry. The lengths these criminals went to bring home the bacon are astounding. If only they had used their skills to cure cancer or end world hunger or something, they could have won a Nobel Peace Prize. Instead, they're sitting in the slammer.